Staff, are we good to go?
Yes, we are.
George? We're good? Okay. All right, welcome, everybody. Let's call the meeting to order at 6 o'clock. Lindsay, may we have a roll call, please?
Chairperson Philip Goldstein,
Here.
Vice Chairperson Marty Jost,
Here.
Commissioner Tom Wood,
Here.
Commissioner Wendy Newland, here, Commissioner Mike Lewis, Alternate Commissioner Michael Lowry,
Here.
Alternate Commissioner Renzo Bianchi.
Here. Thank you. Amendments to the agenda. Commissioners, we're going to flip 7A and 7B. So the Ladera sketch plan will now be 7A. Any other amendments to the agenda? All right. Termination of alternate voting. Renzo, you voted last time when Michael, you'll vote. Michael Lowry, you'll vote this evening. And public comment. This is open public comment opportunity for anybody who wishes to speak on anything that is not on the agenda. There will be an opportunity for public comment on the business items, but if anybody wants to speak on anything not on the agenda, Lindsay, anybody signed up?
No one has signed up for general public comment.
Okay, is anybody that didn't sign up wish to speak on anything not on the agenda? All right, we will close the general public comment. The consent agenda consists solely of the approval of the January 21st, 25 meeting minutes. Staff called my attention to the fact that there is a correction to the minutes. And so Scott, do I understand this is or Carolyn, this is item page 5, item 2 under C. The words "to the sill" gets it correct to correct this. Okay. So
I think it's actually on page 6, top of page 6.
okay, Scott, you said
6.
5, but I think it's the same one and the same, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, the
okay.
6.2 is the final motion, and it said add brick to all columns and vertical elements to the cell. Was
Okay.
the motion.
And I think you and I had that discussion. What did we mean by the sill?
Yeah, so that would be, it was page 5 of the minutes, but page 6 of the packet.
There you go. Okay. So commissioners, any other additions or corrections to the minutes? Okay, hearing none. Do I have a motion on the consent agenda?
Motion to approve the consent agenda?
Second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, the consent agenda is approved. We move on, skip item 6 and move to item 7, public hearing business items. And the first one is our new 7A. That would be, the Ladera sketch plan. Chad, I believe that's you.
Yes. 1 second here. Let me verify real quick with IT. We're trying out a new system here, and so I just wanted to make sure that it is showing within the streaming portion here. I didn't know if you were. Awesome. Thank you, guys. So this item is for the consideration of a sketch plan application for the Ladera subdivision, which is real property defined by the Connell LLC annexation number 3. The applicant is TV Group and the owner is Connell LLC. The subject area for this property is a tract of land located west of and adjacent to County Road 5, north of and adjacent to Kechter Road, and east and west of and adjacent to Weitzel Street. This tract makes up approximately 179 acres of the Ladera subdivision. The application was properly noticed in accordance with Table 2.1 of the town's land use code for hearing process and notice requirements. which require a posted, mailed, and published notice for this application. Um, In addition to that, within this table, a neighborhood meeting was required for a sketch plan. That meeting was held on July 18th in 2024 to present this plan and gather feedback. However, there were no attendees present at that meeting. As a result, there was no observation report attached within your staff report. Just a quick glance at where we're at within the development review process. This is the sketch plan. Again, it's a conceptual layout for the future development, which contains land uses, densities, and major circulation, which would help guide the vision of the development or the project in the future. This is the first step within the major subdivision, so the subsequent process should the sketch plan have it get approval, would move forward to the preliminary plat. In addition to the applicable provisions of the code, the town shall use the following criteria to evaluate a proposed sketch plan application. One being that the land use within the project conforms with the town's zoning map and future land use maps. That the sketch plan represents functional land use consistent with the town's code and comprehensive plan, that the utility and transportation design is adequate, giving existing and planned capacities to those systems, and that negative impacts on adjacent land uses have been identified and mitigated. The zoning for this property is regional commercial with a Ladera plan development overlay, which was approved in February of 2024. The property is designated as employment regional commercial and open space in the town's comprehensive plan. Within the proposed sketch plan, they're proposing 10 planning areas for various uses, that being commercial, retail, office, residential, and open space. This includes roughly 71 acres of commercial and retail areas, 14 acres for mixed use, 21 acres for multifamily housing, and 74 acres of open space. Access will be provided through a potential right out to County Road 5 through this document, in addition to internal drives off Weitzel Street, all represented with the blue arrows within this document. Interconnectivity is being planned to improve the traffic flow within these planning areas to ensure a smooth transition between those land uses. Within this document, you'll see areas represented in orange would be that for multifamily dwellings. Represented in blue would be for business, commercial, and multifamily, so a mixed use development. The red represents the business and commercial retail uses, and then the green would represent the open space. In addition, within this sketch plan, as the conceptual landscape or open space document, this includes multi-use trails and pedestrian paths connecting between open space, proposed developments, and the adjacent properties. There will be 2 street crossings of Weitzel planned within this document to improve the connectivity across Weitzel. Those are represented with the blue dashed line within this document. For a multi-use trail, those would act as the pedestrian spines within the development as it moves throughout the platting process. It is also centered around 2 active reservoirs and recharge ponds designated or designed to support native habitats and passive recreation. So there's a current north reservoir within the area. Currently, the future development proposes a larger reservoir to the southwest within the development. In addition, the plan also includes up to 700 residential units in line with the regional commercial zone district. Those would be within planning areas 6 and 7 of this document. Staff has reviewed this application against the subdivision review criteria and finds it to be in conformance in the following ways. The sketch plan proposed conforms with the town's zoning map and comprehensive plan. This plan conforms to both of these as the plan is the property is designated as comprehensive for employment, regional commercial, and regional commercial is the zoning district. Two, that the sketch plan proposed represents a functional system of land use and is consistent with the code and comprehensive plan. Again, the proposed land use is compatible with the adjacent uses existing and proposed within the town's comprehensive plan. Three, that the sketch plan demonstrates an adequate utility and transportation design at this conceptual level. Again, further evaluation of those will be reviewed during the preliminary and final plat stages. And then lastly, that the sketch plan has been designed with consideration to minimize any potential negative impacts on adjacent land uses, meeting criteria number 4. With that, staff is recommending approval of the Ladera sketch plan. And I will turn it over to the applicant to present their portion.
Good evening, Planning Commission. I was waiting for the presentation.
Yep,
Holy-
sorry, getting it there.
That's all right, Chad. Take your time. Grant Nelson, on behalf of Ladera and Connell LLC. Appreciate you guys coming out on this cold night to hear our sketch plan. As Chad said, we've been working for a number of months on the sketch plan here, and I'll make a brief presentation here tonight with some of our team members and partners in Connell LLC. As Chad said, I'm going to round up to 180 acres. Instead of the 179.74, we'll just round up to 180. That we're excited to kind of take forward in the process. Does that work? Or should I just?
Should work.
Here. Okay. Or can you advance? Turn it on. There we go. As Chad indicated, there's 10 planning areas within the sketch plan. The majority of them being commercial planning area 6 and planning area 7 is where we envision the residential portions to be. Each of these has kind of a unique use. As we mentioned during annexation a year ago, we think there'll be 8 to as many as 10 different uses of land within Ladera, and we're excited to bring those forward. What you'll see at preliminary plat is the lots in blue, we will take through preliminary plat. The lots in yellow and green, we will leave as future tracks for future development. We have 2 users for the northern 2 lots, and we're working with a user on the south lot down against the future reservoir. As Chad said, there's multiple intersection design. We've been working with staff for a while now, and we think we have agreement on the locations of the access points. And what may be new to some of you is there's actually a signal now in the middle of Whitesell, right there in between plan area 4, 5, and 7. So that was, don't think ever contemplated, but through a lot of the research on the traffic study, think that's the best place for it and the most appropriate place for it. And as Chad again indicated, each of the 8 different areas here, we are trying to give you some indication what this could be, but the pedestrian access from the north, from the west, from the south, will hopefully be able to easily go through the site, around the reservoirs, back and forth through Whitesell. There's a pedestrian crossing midway through the signal, and then the roundabout out actually is the 3rd place where pedestrians will be able to cross Whitesell. And we look forward to bringing the preliminary plat forward to you and are here to answer any questions that you may have.
Very good. Stay up there, Grant.
Okay.
Is there anybody signed up for public comment on this, or anybody wishes to speak?
No one has signed up.
Okay, anybody wish to speak? We open the public comment on this, and we'll now close the public comment. So stay there, Grant. Commissioners, questions for Mr. Nelson? I've got a couple, but why don't you all go first? Renzo?
I saw,
At the
That's-
connection between Whitesell and County Road 5?
Yeah. Is there gonna be a stoplight division there as well?
I don't believe there's a stoplight envisioned there. I think it's just a stop sign to enter onto Whitesell, enter onto County Road 5.
Yeah, I don't know if he was talking about Whitesell and County Road 5 or the right in, right out. So were you talking about Whitesell and County Road 5?
Yeah, I believe it's
Right, so
Whitesell.
County Road 5.
Yeah.
That's a really busy intersection. Can get busy. Stop sign. I've already seen accidents at the other side of the traffic. This could probably, yeah, so that's.
Justin, there is going to be a stoplight eventually at, sooner than later, I believe, at Kechter, isn't there?
Yeah, that's the Springs. They're actually, if you go out there, they're working on it now.
That's what I thought.
But we are working with the applicant on that, especially on the master plan. It's a T intersection right now, so it'll work for a while. But yes, in the future, it potentially would be a signal or maybe, we're still looking maybe potentially roundabout, but
Yeah.
that's way, again, this is a sketch plat. This is really early, but we'll definitely look at the traffic projections and make sure what's put. And then the next phase is we do a study. So this is again, just at the sketch plat phase. So we're just looking at the general accesses and stuff at this point.
And the only reason why I was asking is because you added that other stoplight. So obviously, you're assuming that's gonna be a busy street that needs a stoplight. Thanks. Thanks.
Commissioners, other questions?
Yeah, along the
Tom.
same lines, Justin, at a minimum, a protected left, protected right turn at that intersection of County Road 5 and Whitesell, I think makes a lot of sense. Right now, it's kind of a little bit wider and people kind of go around people that are turning right, turning left. But I think that's going to have to be restriped and maybe widened in order to have a protected center lane so people can turn left, turn right at that intersection.
Intersection are you talking about again?
At Whitesell and County Road 5.
Oh, okay.
Even if it's not the traffic light, I think the reason why there's so many accidents is there's somebody gonna pull up to turn left.
Yeah.
or Turn right at that intersection, and then oncoming traffic, interferes. You have to stay and wait and wait and wait, and there's really not a good waiting spot. It's not a protected, 3 lanes with
Yeah.
a protected center lane. I think that at a minimum needs to be done sooner rather than later.
Yeah. And again, at that next level, we're looking already looking at those situations. So, yep.
Great. Yeah, that's the only concerns I've got. I know in some of the open space, you show where you've got public access. Is it intended that public gathering space to have some sort of parking so that people can, have a place to park and then walk around the lake?
There'll be a lot of different users here with lots of parking, so there probably won't be a dedicated public parking lot. But there'll be thousands of parking spaces out here.
Yeah, I would just encourage, because you've got such really nice open space plans, people are going to want to visit. And people that don't live there are going to want to drive from Timnath over here and park and, take their bikes around the light. So I think having some sort of public parking in those areas that you've designated gathering spaces might be a good idea.
We'll look into that as we go forward, but yes,
Thank you.
we hope they go shop and then travel around. the
Well,
lake.
both, yeah.
Others? Marty?
So I think it was fairly obvious in there, but just wanted to make sure the 700 dwelling units, that includes everything, multifamily, okay.
Yeah.
And then in the packet, it said PA 4 and 7, it references vertical development. What is that? What's meant by that?
So planning area 4, I believe, is on the east side of
Yeah.
Whitesell. The multifamily that we envision going there will probably be 2 or 3 stories,
Okay,
maybe as many as 4 stories. And then planning area 7, with our PD overlay last year, I believe we have 1.5 FAR with a height limit of 65. Yeah, I got it right this time. Height limit of 65 feet. So we're hoping that is a place where more density can occur with those views over the lake and look at Long's Peak. We're hoping that someone will take advantage of that someday.
okay. Then let's see. The PA1, it said it was waiting for Bridge and County Road 5 development. It just, is there, just wondering why it was dependent on that.
On planning area 1,
Yeah, the PA1, the open space.
yeah, I mean, the town is working, Justin can probably allude to it, is working on plans for the bridge. And I think all that is meaning is that once the plans for the bridge are known, we'll know more about how we can connect and interact with it.
Okay. Okay. That was it.
Could you, whomever's got the clicker, go back to the all blue, to go back about 3 slides, please? This is, yeah, no, keep going back. And there, okay. Raise it up, please. Thank you. Okay, good. I'm just curious, by the way, Grant, really like the pedestrian crossing signal, the light and the additional pedestrian crossing. That's a great idea, presumably to get people from the residential area that want to walk or bike over there
Yeah,
to the more, yeah, and shop,
And
shop,
shop,
sorry.
exactly.
And go to the lakes, of course. No, I like that. I was just curious, this is neither here nor there. Weren't you originally on the east side going to have some single family? This is going back a couple of years now.
I mean, our residential is to be determined. We, have had a lot of multifamily interest over the years, but financing for multifamily is very difficult right now. We've had one of the big local builders has looked at it for doing, they called it paired housing now instead of duplexes, because I think paired sounds better maybe. A lot of different people have looked at it. We don't have anybody currently that we're working with, and I don't know what it will turn out to be. Most recently, we had a horizontal multifamily developer, they call themselves. So they build multifamily, but they build it in smaller increments in only one story. They just do single story, 700 to 900 square foot individual buildings that people rent out.
But I wasn't crazy. At one time, again, I know how long we've been going at this. At one time, there was single family homes anticipated.
Yeah.
It's neither here nor there to our review of this. I was just curious.
Yeah, it's kind of as the market goes and what we think will fit
So it
best.
still could.
It still could, yep.
Okay. And then I was just curious, as I follow this, right now, all of the residential is on the east side of Whitesville. Just the logic in having potentially some multifamily here in section 7. What, just because, what's the logic of that?
So the logic is if there's a way to create some higher density, higher, 65 foot tall, possibly podium style construction on that side of the lake, facing up against the lake, could be, a real, interesting land use for that.
That's kind of what I thought.
Yeah.
Just curious. I've just been interested in this since it's evolved.
Yeah, there's not a lot of that in northern Colorado today. Not a lot of podium style construction with, residential above retail. But in Denver we see it everywhere. And we believe it's hopefully such a unique piece of real estate, with such interesting views and interconnectivity to the highway and to the rest of the retail, that there's a developer someday that'll come along and see the potential in it. So
Sure.
right now it's Steve and I and our team trying to aspirationally bring this forward.
I know.
But we're hoping it could take off because we think it could be really interesting.
And Justin, I follow this at council meetings. What's the timing on County Road 5, the bridge and everything else? I know this is a major project. They're simply in the study phase right now, or the design phase?
Yeah, so right now we're finishing up what's called the alternatives phases. So we're looking at kind of alignments, also the bridge. Do we use the existing bridge, widen or replace it? Actually, we're going to be going to council here on the 11th of March. We're tentatively scheduled where we're finalizing that. So then the next phase is after we've picked the alternate we want to go with, then we'll start in the design phase. Probably the first phase that we're anticipating is going to be, of course, the bridge and also the intersection improvements, and then tying in all the way to the parkway. So that'll be the first phase, and more than likely the design would be in 26 and probably construction would be in 27. Again, that's just a rough guess right now. So we're looking at least a couple of years out. And then we would look at the rest of the phase is at least have the design and also whatever infrastructure we'd need for, flood control stuff would be maybe built like between the bridge and where Weitzel is. But again, that's not needed at this time, the 4 laning, it's still plenty, the traffic's not at that level right now. So also we'd want to make sure we get our funding built up through the agreement we had done with Ladera to help get that funded and constructed. But that's probably a little bit more down the line and maybe not as needed as the bridge. And mainly the bridge is because you need the intersection improvements for, if you go out there now, it's very constrained to make a left and a right and so forth. So that will widen that intersection up and make huge improvements, and that would buy us quite a bit of time. So,
No, what I'm saying, it'll make the lanes.
yes, exactly. Yeah. So that's the anticipated plan at this point.
Thank you. Commissioners, other questions? Yes.
Since you addressed the bridge. Got a lot of paths in here, which are really, is this gonna tie into Hooter Trail? It's already there. Street goes in that, or are you gonna have to get on the road? Get up to
So I think you need to get, we don't have any access to the Pooter or the Pooter path. So if the Sweats were to give an easement, or if it were, some way for us to access it, we sure would. We think that'd be a great idea.
Yeah, and I can touch on that as well. So with the limitations of where their boundary is, they could tie into the sidewalk along County Road 5, which would then tie into the regional trail. However, there wouldn't be a direct connection from this development to that. If there are further conversations with the Sweats property, we could also talk about that connection.
Commissioners, other questions or comments? All right. With that, do I have a motion on new business item 7A, the Ladera sketch plan?
Motion to approve item
7A.
7A, Ladera sketch plan.
A second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries on a 5-0 vote. Moving on. Thank you all. Okay, business item now, new business item 7B, land use code amendments number 18. Logan.
Good evening, Commissioners. I'll actually be taking the first 2 of the 3 in this section.
Jay, are you doing solar first?
I believe we're doing limitations,
The time limit.
expirations, yeah.
I
there is.
mean,
Okay.
yeah,
Yeah,
and then solar after that?
correct.
Okay,
yes.
thanks. I forgot about this third one. Thank you.
So our first code amendment will be approval expirations. Basically what this is any type of application that comes through our department would have some form of a limitation. So with that said, if you look at Article 2.9 of the Land Use Code lays out procedures for land development within the town. They outline application through the approval process, but there's no regulation for what happens if a plan becomes inactive. So if the commission or if the town were to approve a building project and then it lays dormant for years at a time, there could be changes in the land use code. There could be federal or state changes as well that could affect the nature of that build. So this puts a limitation on the application. Basically says that they must be diligently pursued from the time of approval. So the goal is basically, again, to provide a timeframe for all approved applications to be diligently pursued from approval to construction and occupancy. When approaching this code update, we surveyed 4 nearby communities to understand what their expiration time limits looked like. And then we reviewed the land use code, specifically 2.9, that lays out the procedures for land development within the town. And then we identified what areas within the town's code would best fit or best benefit from expirations. So the towns that we looked at, specifically Loveland, Severance, Berthoud, and Johnstown, the majority of the towns had anywhere from 1 year to 3 years for expiration. So this proposed code amendment, we went through all the different types of applications and basically assigned an effective decision, which would be in most cases a expiration date or expiration for the item. And some, there would be a vested right, which would be a different type of mechanism. So staff recommendation would be to approve this section, which would again amend section 2.9 of the land use code.
Thanks. We're obviously going to take these land use code amendments separately.
Absolutely.
Anybody interested in public comment on this land use code amendment item? All right, now I'm closing public comment on this item. Commissioners, questions or comments? I've got 1 or 2. Who would like to go first? Tom?
Yeah, I've got a question. The extension for good cause is really not well defined. I know that all of the towns you kind of looked at have gone through dramatic and rapid growth lately, but what's going to happen if materials costs go up through the roof and labor is not available and banks aren't loaning you money? There's a lot of economic issues that I could envision even some of the projects we have now ongoing could be delayed by at least a year or more. Is there a definition of what a good cause is, or is it just up to staff?
It would just be up to staff on what good cause is. I think it would be any reasonable request where perhaps the delay was due to staffing issues. More recently, a very good example is the pandemic often resulted in good cause for applications to be reviewed. It gives that discretion to staff to determine what that good cause. It might be a financial reason from a bank, from the lending perspective. We just don't want the generic, the dog ate my homework and I need more time. They just need to demonstrate there's a good cause for the delay.
Fair enough. I'm sure that, tariffs on wood coming from Canada could be a big deal.
A little political commentary there. Okay. All right. Renzo.
Yeah, you want to send this into exploration at the very least.
It varies based on what type of application. So I believe the most we have is 2 years, actually. I don't think we have one that is at 3 years.
Okay, so my question is what if I didn't see any of that addressed in the write-up. Is there a way that we would still if this is good for so I just don't know this house.
So I think the intent would be that this would be good for the duration up to the expiration. So if it is a 2-year, it would be good up for that 2 years. So there would be some right that the developer would have. It really comes down to communication and a lot of the codes that we reviewed and what we put into this language uses a terminology like diligently pursued. And that intent is that there's clear communication happening between the entities, between the town and the developer. So we would know if it's not being pursued, and then we could have that conversation. And if there is going to be a code change that would affect that, I mean, I guess there could be a case situation. I don't, Logan, what would you add?
So we chose the timeframes. They're reasonable for them to kind of move on into the building process. They put a lot of money into their drawings, into their engineers, and so they need some sort of assurance that their approval is going to get them to the finish line. And so if our codes change, they change.
You turn your microphone on, talk on the mic. All the thousands of people out there that want to hear what you have to
Sorry.
say.
Because this is what caught my eye when I was trying to address this is Loveland, which has been around and growing pretty steadily. They did a six month versus what we're proposing. I mean, was there a reason why they did it to 6 months versus the other? I understand the costs and all that associated with those projects, but
I would say the 6 month is definitely an outlier for a site plan. Quite a bit of work goes into that. And in a lot of communities, a site plan is a vested right, meaning they get 3 years vested rights. So the 6 months is an anomaly. I'm not sure. I'd have to look at that a little closer.
That answer your question?
it does.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Marty?
So 2.9.911, the effect of the decisions, it says that the approval shall expire if the applicant does not apply for a building permit and commence construction. I was just wondering what, is there any definition of what constitutes commencing? Is it the grading or?
Yeah, I believe if they applied for a building permit and started grading, that would show us that action is being taken.
And does it need to, I don't think it's defined really in here. It's, what if it stalls after commencing? Or am I getting too picky?
I mean, that's a situation we would have to work with the developer on.
Yeah.
So we didn't go that deep.
Okay.
Others? I asked the question admittedly offline about grandfathering in existing developers. I understand they would be subject to this too, correct? In other words, we're not somebody who it has been in works for a while but hasn't moved forward. They would not be grandfathered.
As it's currently drafted, no. So it would be the effective date when the ordinance is passed. It'd be pretty difficult to give I mean, generally, right now it's 3 years, I believe, what our time frame is, but depending on what the approval is, that would set that time frame for those expiration dates. And in some instances, they do have the option to ask for an extension that does give a little bit of that discretion if there is some time to adjust accordingly with the new codes.
So this clock starts ticking again when when this is passed? in essence.
Correct.
Okay. All right. So they
Well,
will
no,
still-
it doesn't start ticking again. It's ticking now, but it would be effective the date it came in. So if you
under
had
the new standards.
if you had a site plan that was approved 2.5 years ago, it would be expired effective at the state.
Okay,
But they could ask for an extension
okay.
that would allow them to get additional time.
Right.
Currently, we don't have language that specifies the expiration date, so we default to what I believe is the state standard of 3 years.
Commissioners, other questions about this? Okay. Yeah.
Just one thing, and I don't want to put a condition on it. I don't feel that strongly about it, but just take note that, a good refinement for this may be what happens if one stalls. Again, nothing, just when it comes back around, it'd be, I think, something to consider anyway.
All right, it's not spelled out on the agenda and just, Commissioners, am I the only one? Maybe moving forward as we do these, we might want to delineate these on the agenda because we're going to be voting on these separately as we will in a moment on this one. So going forward, we might want, for instance, a 7 now, this is 7B, 7B1 or something like that, and spell out the particular land use code amendment. Okay, so we are voting separately on these. Okay, Commissioners, with that, so on the approval expirations land use code amendment, do I have a motion?
Motion to approve item 7B, approval expirations.
Okay, Bill said, do I have a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, this one carries, this amendment carries on a 5-0 vote. Thank you. All right, the next one.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairperson. Our next amendment will be for solar energy facilities. So when we began looking at this, we looked at the whole scope of what solar energy can be and what it can be defined as. And we've really narrowed the intent of this to solar farm, which I'll get into the parameter of what a solar farm would be. So the Timnath Land Use Code does not address the construction or regulation of solar power generation infrastructure at all. There's nothing in our code that currently regulates this. So this text amendment seeks to provide the definitions, zone permissions by zone district, setback requirements, height limitations, safety and infrastructure, landscaping and buffering requirements, monitoring and reporting, as well as decommissioning regulations for solar energy systems. So when we approached this, we surveyed 9 communities, mostly in Colorado and some outside of Colorado, to understand how they regulate solar energy production. We reviewed the town's land use code to identify the appropriate place to add a section for solar. And then we also identified the scope of solar projects that are appropriate for the town. So scope kind of comes into play if you're getting really large, something like only way to put it, or how I'm going to define it, is like a power plant situation. There's going to be different regulations through the Utility Commission, the Public Utility Commission, et cetera. So we wanted to look at the scope and what would we be comfortable with in the town, given the land use zones that could potentially accommodate this. Sorry, I'm flipping. There we go. Okay. So after reading the land use codes of the nine communities in Colorado, we discovered that there are many ways to approach regulating solar facilities. We then found regulations that best fit what we were trying to achieve in Timnath. And there were 3 counties and 2 locally that fit. So the code language that we were looking at, we actually found the language was more appropriate in counties, but they were home rule counties, not in towns like ours. Our proposed code amendment is structured to regulate solar arrays 10 acres in size or larger. For solar farms of this size, we compared whether other communities allowed by rights or with conditions in zone districts similar to those, similar in definition to Timnath's agriculture district. And then if we basically found that the best use, the best zone district for this use would be agriculture. We have very limited industrial. That would likely be the other logical use. But given the nature of a solar farm and the long-term activity and how it kind of land banks that land or banks that land for a long period of time, agriculture made more sense. We didn't want to tie up the limited industrial that we had. So the proposed code amendment amends section 4.4.43 to address solar energy systems by adding the following sections. Section on site plans, written narrative, height and setback standards, safety and infrastructure standards, monitoring and reporting, decommission and site restoration, and then, of course, adding the definitions for this new section to the definitions page. So again, the recommendation from staff would be to approve sections 4.4.43 and 11.2 of the land use code and zoning map amendments as approved, as provided in the staff report. And again, this kind of outlines what those entail. And this concludes my report.
That's it.
That's it.
Okay. Anybody signed up for public comment on this?
No one has signed up.
Anybody wish to speak? All right. We'll close public comment on this item and come up here to commissioners. Questions?
Yeah,
Tom?
yeah.
Okay. Well, we're going to introduce this. We're kind of in uncharted territory here. You all are humoring me to try my idea of assigning principal responsibility to an individual commissioner, and Tom has volunteered to take this one. So Tom's just going to kick this off with whatever comments, questions he has, and then everybody else will certainly chime in as we have before. But appreciate Tom being the guinea pig here.
Sure.
With Wendy also, our next guinea pig up.
No problem. So I did look into this and research it a little bit. And I appreciate staff. I wrote a few comments, and the ones in the revised version that are in darker red are some of my comments, and the lighter red were the original comments. So I added a few things related to what do you do with the solar farm when it's all done? There are some things that may be hazardous. You know, they move, you've got to grease the wheels, you've got to do things. There's land below the solar panels, and in some cases they use herbicides to clean the clear the grass and the weeds and stuff. So we want to make sure that we understand as a town what might be hazardous associated with the operations and then the future disposal of a solar farm when you're done.
Excuse me, Tom, this is darker red.
Darker
are the
red stuff.
comments that you suggested.
Yeah, that was
Okay.
some of the things that I threw in there. And they've incorporated some of the things I wrote, not all of them. Another, I think, real big part of this is if you have an area that's going to have a new solar farm, you need to know where you're going to plug it in. Because imagine you're going to put a solar farm out, away from town, and there's no place to interconnect it with the rest of the power. You're pretty much assuming that they're going to build a set of high voltage power lines out to that solar panel, and it may involve large towers. It may involve switch yards. There could be other associated things. And I think it's real important in this one connection, they say all electrical interconnections, distribution lines shall be underground. But I think we may even want to go beyond that so that the project developers would say how they're going to plug it in. And in the future, are they going to need to have high voltage power lines across the fields next to it, or are they going to run it underground, or what have you? I think that's an important part of a lot of these solar farms, because you wouldn't want somebody to build one and then you prove it and they come back later and say, oh yeah, by the way, we need to run these huge power lines another mile in order to plug it in. It does affect it. We want to make sure that they're built stoutly so that they don't blow away. You don't want solar panels flying in the wind if we have a tornado or breaking up with hail. So they've added a few things in here. A few things that we didn't add in here that I think we should consider just a little bit. in Weld County, and I know they went out and looked at some of the other counties, they put a restriction on agricultural land. They only want lands that are dry lands, that farms that are already irrigated are limited. They don't want to take up all these irrigated farmlands with solar arrays. So they put some restriction on that. And I think that that was a really good idea. You know, Tinmouth has got a long history of being a farming town. And where we have irrigated family farms, I think we should try to preserve them. That's what they're doing in Weld County, rather than putting up solar farms, which, well, you can't eat solar farms, so you can eat vegetables from an irrigated land. So I think that's something to be aware of. Recently, a large power company decided not to put it in Weld County, but they put it in Severance because Severance didn't have that restriction. So there's people that are looking to build these. There's very few farms really in our growth area north of the reservoir. And we certainly would want to preserve irrigated agricultural land, I think, in preference over a solar array. Whereas a dry land where there's no water to irrigate crops, you know, maybe that's more reasonable. And I do think that there may be some industrial potential. For example, if Walker Lawnmower Factory does expand like they'd like to do, it's not quite 10 acres, but they're going to have a pretty big roof. And if they wanted to, they could put quite a commercial solar farm, I think, on top of it. So there may be a few industrial areas that might be considered. Maybe it's a one-off, but you know, we wouldn't want to prohibit it exclusively. There may be some exceptions that make sense. So those were pretty much my comments, and happy to answer any questions if you don't like my comments, or if you have anything you want to add to it. But other than that, I thought this was very well written. I appreciate what staff has done.
It's all right. Thanks. That was a nice introduction for it. Okay, commissioners, let me just, well, let's see what other questions we have. I have a couple questions for the staff. Let's take off on that now and see what else. Renzo.
Yeah, Tom, I'm glad you brought up Walker on that last one, because that was a concern I had too about putting it on the roof as opposed to other. When I read through this, I finally glared on me that it was solar farms. If at all in the wording, we can add at least the words, this applies the intent or whatever, or an overview that it is solar farms, that would be very clear. It just wasn't clear to me. And then can you back up to your little table 1? I got confused when I read this table 1, and maybe you could just clarify it for me. Yeah, this one right here. When I read the context down below and read the legend, the stars tell me that these are not allowed. So I questioned, I said, where is this actually going to be allowed? And to Tom's point too, you know, with those others. So if you can explain that, and if I interpreted that correctly or not.
So again, the original intent was, we did look at industrial. I think Commissioner Wood makes a valid point of potentially having a large scale solar farm on a rooftop. If there were to be a building of that size, that would make sense. But initially we did look at industrial. Just the footprint of our industrial zone district in Timnath is so small. We didn't want to tie that up. That was the intent. So we do have currently, as this stands, it would just be permitted with conditions in agriculture.
And it says there it's ground installed solar.
This is
collectors.
ground mounted. So in the case of Walker, they would certainly still be able to put solar panels on their rooftops.
Or if he ever closes his runway for the airport, then that would also be a possible solar farm.
Michael.
Yeah.
My one concern is that I think the town should have some type of inspection clause. You know, with the chemicals and all the materials being stored. It appears that they're gonna write the safety reports. but I think the town should have the right to do their own inspections.
Staff, you want to comment on that? Any,
Or does
Any
the
thoughts?
state have the authority to inspect at will?
Yeah, I think that CDPHE, State Health Department, has the ability to inspect, and they would have to set up, designated areas for hazardous materials and those kinds of things. So I think there's a lot of state law that would apply there, and typically the town would defer to the state. That's only my guess.
Yeah, I would concur. I mean, the inspections typically in the hazardous materials, that's not something the town currently regulates. That's more of a state level of regulatory framework when you're looking at oil and gas, underground storage tanks and those sort of things. So there is a requirement about annual reporting that's in there about the energy distributed, and that certainly creates an opportunity to ask questions about any incidents that they may have and reporting in that regard. I do want to follow up on Commissioner Renzo's comment about farm. We did change the terminology to be more consistent with the state's defined definition of a solar facility. So it's more consistent with the definition and terminology of the state. So I think it captures the essence that we're talking about a solar farm here. So I just wanted to point out those comments. Thanks.
who's next here? Wendy? Michael, anything else?
Nope, that was.
Marty, on solar.
So the only thing that hadn't been asked that was on mine was there's 4.4.43.4.c. And it basically is about the buffering of this. And I guess, the only thing in there was, and see what the rationale was, because with solar farms or solar panels of any kind, you don't want trees blocking that. So is that, I couldn't interpret that in there. Is that contemplated in here that the buffering that we would normally do, like for industrial and things, probably, may not be a good thing for a solar farm?
We can certainly review this type of plantings during the site plan submittal. But this is just buffering for public rights of way and the neighboring residences. So if it's abutting the property, those two property lines would need buffering.
Yeah.
But yes, do you have other suggestions of how to amend the language or?
No, it's just, instead of like the trees and things, it would be probably like 10, 15 feet.
Right.
Something like that, lower growing instead of
Really
evergreens and
right.
things that are, you would probably want evergreens and not deciduous, and then you would want lower growing, but if this is in there, I would imagine that it's going to be part of the discussions, because they would be concerned about how much their production is going to be blocked.
Right. So yeah, we would review it all during the site plan submittal.
Yeah. Okay.
Anything else?
No.
Tom, I guess I'll ask you first. You've put a lot of work into this, which is greatly appreciated. Anything, I kind of asked Tom and staff jointly, anything that Tom brought forward, submitted to you in writing that did not get incorporated in here that you want to continue to
I think they
make a
covered.
case on? I'd be
They
remiss in not-
summarized, they wrote it better than I did. So they did it. They included most, I think, of the important things that I put forward.
Good.
I think the one thing Tom touched on that we did not include was that preservation of ag land, the irrigated, productive farmland that Weld County has an example of. So if that's something.
I do think
Yeah.
it's important that we try to preserve family farms and irrigated ag land. There's not that many farms in Timnath. I know that will limit the ability for the town of Timnath to put too many solar farms out there, but I do think it's a serious consideration.
So it's a great comment. I appreciate it. As you may be aware, we're about ready to embark on updating our comprehensive plan. Among other things, this is one of the areas that I've highlighted as a point of conversation about preservation of ag land and open space. And there are tools out there. So that's something that I hope with that process that will lead to more clarity in how the town can go about doing that. Larimer County has a program they have used successfully to preserve some areas through transfer development rights. And so that's something that I want us to explore moving forward with the comprehensive plan.
Great. One other comment that it just struck me that I didn't put in, but I probably should have. There are solar farms that are built on lakes where they float solar panels. I would very much dislike the Timnath Reservoir to have a solar. I have a sailboat, and I don't think that would be great. So I don't have a problem with limiting the use of floating solar arrays on the reservoirs in Timnath. I guess I'm selfish there. I apologize.
I don't blame you. I believe Marty would have something to say about that too, since,
Couple things.
yes. Commissioners, other questions on solar?
No.
Very good. With that, thought I had one more question here. Did he, Michael Lowry's, Michael's comment about inspection, did we satisfy ourselves? Everybody, you're good with that? Okay. Very good. With that, if nobody has any additional questions, I need a motion, please, on, we don't have a business item number here, land use code amendment on solar.
So I'd like to make a motion that we approve the Timnath Land Use Code update for solar facilities.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Carries on a 5-0 vote. And Tom, again, nice job kicking this thing off.
No problem. It was fun.
Lot of work went into this. Okay, we move on.
Just to clarify that those were the amended ones that were distributed to the Plan Commission tonight, correct?
Tom's with his amendments. Yes,
Yes.
thank you. Would we have had, should we have had an amendment to the amendment? Okay, thank you. All right, we move on now to auxiliary dwelling units. Logan.
Okay, here we go. All right, so accessory dwelling units are defined as an internal, attached, or detached dwelling unit that provides a complete independent living facility for one or more individuals, is located on the same lot as the proposed or existing primary residence, and includes facilities for living, sleeping, eating, cooking, and sanitation. Some of the benefits, housing affordability, as we all know, housing prices are going up. So ADUs could provide additional income or less expensive housing options. They increase the number of small units available for rent, often in the most desirable parts of a city. They're able to house people of all ages. So they serve families through all stages of their life cycle and enable residents to age in place. And they can also be adapted for different household types, income levels, and employment situations. They enable families to expand beyond their primary house. And they provide empty nesters and others with an option of moving into a smaller space while renting out their larger house or letting an adult child reside in it. They're community compatible, so they offer a way to include a smaller, relatively affordable home in established neighborhoods with minimal visual impact and without adding to the area's sprawl. They maximize the use of existing infrastructure and help alleviate pressure on open space and ag land. So they concentrate development and support the goals of infill and revitalization. They provide a more dispersed and incremental way of adding homes to a neighborhood than other options, such as multi-story apartment buildings. And they generally measure between 600 and 1,000 square feet. So they kind of work well for that 1 to 2 bedroom home needed for today's smaller childless households, which now account for nearly 2/3 of all households in the US. So it's important to consider local concerns, and common concerns related to ADUs typically consist of infrastructure capacity, loss of on-street parking, worries about absentee owners and irresponsible tenants, fears of changes to neighborhood character. And these concerns vary across different neighborhoods and vary in terms of magnitude. And I think staff is sensitive to these concerns. So today, big houses are being built, but small houses are really needed. So in the year 1970, the average square footage of a new single-family home was around 1,500. And in 2019, that shot up to 2,500. Number of people per household is shrinking. We went from 3.14 to 2.5, and our square footage per person is doubling. So the land conversion rate is pretty interesting, and rapid. Here in Timnath, you can see Lindsay put together this map, but building permits being issued in 2024. And so there's a quick land conversion. So we're quickly building more homes. They're bigger homes on bigger lots. So we're taking up more space, but housing less people. So on the left, there's a little image of a block in Old Town with several accessory structures in their backyards. And so it's just an example of these could easily be converted into ADUs to house more people. So some examples why planners love these is because they're really discreet and they nestle behind the primary dwelling pretty easily, and they don't really change the character of the neighborhood from the street. So here are all examples, and you can see they're pretty hard to see from the street. So why now? Why are we proposing this? Well, the state passed legislation last year that will take effect on June 20th. So we have to be in compliance by June 20th. And the law is applicable to home rule cities like us that have a population of 1,000 or more. And the proposed law removes constraints most limiting to legal ADU construction to develop a land use policy that helps address the need for more housing. So subject jurisdictions must allow the construction of one detached ADU between 500 and 750 square feet in size, and that's a minimum. The conversion or part of a single family dwelling to accommodate an ADU. And then this would apply to any lot or parcel where a single family dwelling is allowed, regardless of whether the lot or parcel is located in a standard base zoning district or an overlay zoning district, and regardless of any sort of restrictive HOA clauses. And also applications for ADUs must be reviewed administratively, meaning staff would have the authority to approve or deny the application, and it cannot be escalated up to you all or town council. And then approval or denial must be based on compliance with objective standards included in the land use code. So we're not allowed to use restrictive design or dimensional standards that don't apply to single family detached dwellings. So here's kind of a comparison of what we may and may not do. And I'll just go through the may not. We may not require owner occupancy. We may not require the construction of an additional parking space. We may not require compliance with architectural style, building material, landscape standards that don't apply to a single family home on the lot. We can, require a larger lot for the ADU that would, so we cannot require a larger lot for the ADU than would otherwise apply to a single family detached dwelling. We cannot require larger side or rear setbacks than those stated in the law. And we can't apply more restrictive design and dimensional standards. So the proposed changes before you, So again, we must allow ADUs between 500 and 750 square feet in size on any lot or parcel where a single-family detached dwelling is allowed. So the proposed change, we went ahead, single-family detached dwellings are allowed in the business district. That's one of the zoning districts in Old Town. So we went ahead and added that, and then we removed it from the CMU district because single-family detached dwellings are not allowed in the CMU. We amended the size. So we currently are in compliance with the state law. But we thought a more nuanced approach would be good. So we are proposing 850 square feet in floor area for lots 10,000 square feet or less, if in a detached building or attached to the principal dwelling. And then that could be increased to 1,000 square feet in floor area for lots 10,000 square feet or more if in a detached building or attached to the principal dwelling. And then if it's internal, it can be equal to the building footprint to the principal building. So we also are saying that in Old Town, these can be accessory to non-single family uses. So if you're in the R1 or B zone districts, which are only in Old Town, these would be allowed when associated with a duplex or a multifamily dwelling, provided that the entire property is under single ownership. And then another change that is applicable only to Old Town is the number of ADUs allowed. So we only need to allow one. That's the minimum per single family lot. But we thought in Old Town to really try to drive some development and redevelopment, we thought we would allow more than one in the R1 and B zone districts, but only one would be able to be in a detached building. And then we also put in the restriction that there should be at least 2,000 square feet of lot area for each unit, including the principal use. So that's ensuring that the lot is big enough and the units are in scale. And then parking. Currently, we require one parking space per dwelling unit. We went ahead and removed that provision. And then the owner occupancy, we currently require owner occupancy in the ADU or the principal dwelling unit on the lot, and we went ahead and removed that provision as well. So it's important to note that accessory dwellings must comply with all zoning and building standards as detailed in the land use code. So even if the current zoning allows for an accessory dwelling, unique characteristics on the property or existing development may mean that an accessory dwelling unit is just not technically feasible on a lot. So when we're looking at standards such as setbacks, height, and size, taken together, this will really restrict the number of lots that are even eligible to have an ADU. Other limiting factors include construction costs, permit fees, and the fact that not every homeowner wants an ADU on their property. So we don't feel like these changes are going to create this proliferation of ADUs coming online. We just don't see that happening. So our recommendation is to approve this land use code amendment as provided in the staff report, and that concludes my presentation.
Thank you. I'm going to open public comment. Anybody wish to speak on auxiliary dwelling units by way of public comment? Hearing none, I'll close public comment. And I turn it over to Wendy, who has graciously volunteered to take this.
So you answered a lot of my questions in your presentation. Thank you very much. But I'm going to go ahead and ask them anyway, just because I know that there's going to be people out there in the world that are going to have the same questions that I do, because I'm approaching it as Joe Citizen, certainly not an expert on ADUs. So it appears that in that table 4.1, you crossed out CMU and you added B, mixed use B, which now you've clarified is Old Town, right? It's not like what you see at Belmar, any of those places in Denver that have business on the bottom and residential on top, right?
So our business district does allow for mixed use
Okay.
buildings. So they're certainly able, if there's a lot available and they want to develop commercial residential, they can do so.
Okay. So then a question, 4.4.1.6A, accessory dwellings may be permitted when associated with a single-family detached dwelling in the R1 and B1 districts, da, 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 da. And then, or a multifamily dwelling provided that the entire property is under single ownership. I think you clarified this, but I need to understand. Multifamily dwelling is an apartment complex, right?
Correct.
Okay. Does the single owner have to live in the duplex or apartment? Or can they own it, live out of state and just rent everything?
Yeah, so that provision is the owner occupancy, and that's removed completely.
Okay.
We're not going to require owner occupancy. So we were thinking about it, multi-unit dwellings could be condoed. And would it make sense to allow ADUs where there's multiple owners on a property? Probably not. So it's only for properties where there's maybe a fourplex and a single owner owns all units and the land.
All right. And then 4.4.16B, the floor area of an accessory dwelling shall be a minimum of 400 square feet and limited to no more than larger of. Then you provide the guidance, the bullet points, right? 1, 2, 3. So why are we more lenient than the state key provisions? Because theirs is 500 to 750.
Yeah, so an 850 square foot dwelling unit is pretty small. At max, you probably squeeze in 2 bedrooms. That would be tight. So on larger lots, if there was a family who wanted their parents to age in place or have a unit, we thought that one up to 1,000 square foot would kind of allow for more living space, but it would still be subordinate to the primary structure. It wouldn't dramatically change like the built what it looks like on the lot. So it'd still be in scale to the size of the lot. So a lot of communities kind of have a scaled allowance, and we thought this would just be one more permittance that might be desired in the community.
Would it get us in any sort of trouble? Is anybody going to come back and go, why are we different from the state? And why are we allowing this part of town to do something?
So we at a minimum just have to comply with the state. Certainly there could be concerned neighbors if they don't like the idea of ADUs, and perhaps that impedes on privacy, or they don't want so many buildings in their neighborhood. We could see that pushback.
Okay. All right. And then 4.4.1.6C. R1 and B zones can have multiple accessory dwelling units provided only one unit ADU may be in a detached building, and there should be at least 2,000 square feet of lot area for each unit, including the principal use. So this reads to me, not being an attorney, that I must have 2,000 square feet of yard to build an ADU. Is that right?
It just means, so let's say there's a duplex and they want to do an ADU. So that's a total of 3 units. They need 6,000 square feet to be able to accommodate the 3 units.
Does the state have that rule?
No. Mm-mm.
And
To clarify, isn't that only a requirement if they're going to have more than one ADU?
Correct.
okay. So why do we need that much land in order to build a 400 square foot ADU? What are we?
Well, so
Are we proposing that?
if a property is only when it's first entitled and it only has so many units and we're saying you can add more, we want to make sure that there's a balance between the land available, the setbacks, and then the actual building footprint coverage. So this just kind of tries to get at that balance of, we don't want you to jam in 5 ADUs where the lot may not be able to accommodate that. So it's
Right.
giving a reasonable measure.
Right, right. I would agree. I just want people to like feel like they're treated fairly all over town. And then 4.4.1.6E, the accessory dwelling shall meet the development and dimensional standards for the lot outlined in Article 4 and 5. So I'm going to ask someone to explain Article 4 and 5, but let me tell you why I'm asking. Because do you have access to the internet? Can we bring the internet up? Okay, could you go to the Town of Timnath website? Because believe it or not, I really was trying to do my homework.
I'd say you were.
Just see.
Article 4 in the land use code.
Okay, but could you go to the town's website, like www.timnath.gov? Do we have access to the internet?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So the first thing I did, because I didn't have a copy of the land use code, and I'm like, okay, what's 4, what's 5? So I did this search, you know, the little magnifying glass, and I typed in land use code.
Can I just go my way? I mean, I trust you.
Well, you
Or do you want me to do it like this? Okay.
Specific.
All right. Uh, and you search land
Yeah,
use
I went
code?
land use code, and that's where I saw that
Okay.
that we had a meeting, that I have a question about that meeting.
Okay.
So anyway, there's no land use code there. So then I thought, okay, well, I'm going to be very clever. So go back up to the top,
It could be under here, but okay.
and
Up
then
to
I
the
went to
top.
your government, which was my next logical thought, and I went to municipal code.
No, well. I can't, I'm sorry, I need glasses.
Right there.
And then I found land use code down under, I think it's 16. So yeah, I thought, perfect, great, I can find it. And then I click on land use code right there, and I can't. So anyway, I just didn't want you to think, hey, she didn't do her homework, but I am very curious about Article 4 and 5.
Sure.
Just to
So-
clarify, there's 2 ways you can get there. If you did your original search for land use code, the last link is planning, and it's a link from planning.
Okay.
So also if you just Google Timnath land use code, it's the first or second thing that comes up is the planning, and then you go there and you can
Okay.
find it.
But
That
I
is
think
the
that's great,
difference.
Wendy. We should definitely look into that and make sure the links are working. But yeah, so once you go to the planning
Okay,
page,
great. There.
you go here to the land use code, interactive land use code, boom, there's
Perfect.
that beautiful document.
Perfect, perfect. I thought maybe you took it down because we're changing it.
We
All right,
don't want you
anyway.
to see. No.
It's like temporarily under construction. Okay. So help me understand the dimensional standards for the lot outlined in 4 and 5.
Yes, so Article 4 is your use standards. And then it gets into, so that's like telling you what sort of uses are permitted in the different zone districts. And then you get into Article 5, and here you can see some of those development standards, dimensional standards. So that's setbacks, coverage, height.
Height, okay.
So those are those governing standards that will tell you where you can put it on your lot and how big it can be and how tall it can be.
Perfect, because height was one of my questions. Okay, perfect. Then it says on 4.4.1.6H, since a detached accessory dwelling shall be located in the rear yard, that has a strike through. So it reads like they can be put anywhere, even in the front yard, or is that in Article 4?
No, so they would still need to meet the setback standards
Okay, perfect.
of Article 4.
That eases a lot of minds, I'm sure. And then just some general questions. Architectural integrity of the ADU. So does Article 4 and 5 address someone, I mean, what's to stop somebody from painting it hot pink or putting Denver Broncos on the side of it? You know what I'm saying? Is that?
Yeah, so those were some of the things, the kind of architectural compatibility is what
Okay.
the state said was subjective, was not an objective standard. And so those were lifted.
Okay, okay. And then, so HOA cannot stop an ADU. I mean.
An HOA cannot
Okay.
stop an ADU
Okay.
with this law.
But they could probably require it to be a color that they approve, because it would still go through
And
approval
no hot
process, wouldn't
pink,
it?
no Denver Broncos, no, that on the same.
Yes.
Okay. 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 Yeah.
Yeah, so they could do that if they were if they were also restricting the single family detached dwellings. They could not if it was just specific to the ADU.
Okay. There was a lot of, when you were giving your presentation, there were some things about this was for Old Town and whatnot. There was you said there was or what, I'm sorry, when we brought that thing up, when I was doing my search, there was a meeting, right? Okay. Was any feedback from the meeting incorporated into?
Yeah, so I should have started with that. So we did have a public feedback session at the beginning of February, first
Yeah.
Wednesday.
Okay.
So it was just a call out to all residents interested in solar ADUs. We had 5 participants, and we did receive specific feedback, and we did incorporate most of that feedback. So the attendees did like the kind of loosening of standards or allowances for Old Town specifically. They felt like it made sense there, but perhaps not other places in town. And then I think they did want us to inventory or keep track of the number of ADUs that are rentals. I did not include that in the code. That I thought would be administratively burdensome and hard to track. So I think that was like one of the ones I did not include, but most of their feedback was included in the version you see.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Great.
For now, yeah.
Great job as well.
I might have
Thank
some
you.
more.
All right, Marty.
So I want to take off on a couple things that Wendy had dug into. So there was 5 people at this meeting. How many from Old Town?
How many from Old Town? I don't think any that live in Old Town specifically.
Okay, because I'm just concerned, allowing multiple there. It could potentially have a bad impact. I understand the benefits of drawing more people in, but people also will drive from other parts of Timnath if there's a business worth going to there. But I'm just, I mean, the way it is now in Old Town with the street parking and things, people are putting up signs, you know, don't park in front of my house sort of thing. I just picture that, you know, there being some negatives with this, that if Old Town hasn't had a chance to weigh in on this yet, that I can't see going forward with this particular wording about the R1 and B without a lot more input from them, you know, especially treating one area of town differently than the others. I think we have to be very sure that they even want that.
I would agree. We certainly can do more outreach to people, residents of Old Town.
Yeah. So good, that's good. And then the HOA that Wendy had brought up, I'm just concerned that HOAs tend to find loopholes, you know, and because sometimes the state laws, they're appropriately vague and allow for a lot of loopholes. So, you know, it's like garden boxes were one of the state laws, and like my HOA allows garden boxes, but they doubled or more than doubled the setbacks. So if I want to put one in my backyard, it's got to be 20 foot off the property line, which isn't practical. So I can't have a garden box. So it's just, I'm just concerned that the intent is HOAs shouldn't restrict these, but if they don't want them in their neighborhood, they're going to find easy ways to say that you can't do this.
Yeah, I think in this case, the language is pretty specific. So it's like you cannot be more restrictive than the standards you apply to a single family detached dwelling. So it would be difficult, I think, for them to find loopholes. I'm sure it's possible.
Yeah, because I mean, there's a lot of times they take advantage of, you know, it has to be complementary to the neighborhood. And it's like, that's very, very subjective.
Right.
But the thing that puts the homeowner in the position of is what's your recourse if they say no, you know, for whatever reason, you know, that you're left suing the HOA, and the town really, you know, does the town play a part in this at all in helping to defend the homeowner?
No, we don't get involved in.
So Marty, I know you're talking a lot about HOAs in our neighborhood. It's Metro District.
Yeah, metros, HOAs, whichever one takes on the covenants and, you know.
But they have a strict architecture design document that they adhere to or anything that goes.
Why don't you pull your microphone down, Renzo, so everybody can hear you.
Oh, I was just saying they do have a published guidance
Yeah,
as far as what the architectural is. So, you know, that could be, like you say, is a way that they could prohibit
yeah,
or even at least dictate how they would get built.
yeah, because I just think we need to keep an eye on this one because there's some out there, not all, but there's some that it's all about control, not about making the neighborhood better. And that's going to restrict people's rights on the ADUs.
Marty, other comments or questions? Go ahead.
4.1.6, it's the one about the square footage. I just wanted, I didn't know, is that like the 1,000 square feet? Is that the footprint of it or the total habitable square footage of the
Yeah,
building?
total floor area.
Floor area. So if you had 1,000 square foot foundation, you could be 2 stories.
No, so it's not building footprint. It's total square footage.
Okay. It wasn't clear to me anyway in there of what that was.
Okay.
Say that. That says floor area. Maybe I didn't understand the term. That was it.
Great. Renzo, did you have something additional?
Actually, Wendy did a great job and asked all the questions. So
Tom,
did.
you
Very
got
good.
your microphone on.
Yeah, I appreciate that you had the one slide that talked about some of the disadvantages of ADUs. I know there's a lot of advantages, and I appreciate that you added that slide because there are some disadvantages. And some of the things that I worry about, there's no public hearing required, and city staff or town staff has kind of the right to make decisions, unilaterally on some of this. But I do believe that notifications, at least to the adjacent neighbors, may be appropriate, particularly in places like Old Town where there are much more opportunities for ADUs than there are other places. Just the recent look at the alleyway. I think the neighbors were clearly had opinions about that, and I think it was directly related to a proposed ADU. So I think that we need to recognize that there are going to be people with opinions about this, and I think some sort of a notification, whether or not a public hearing is really required, but at least a notification might be necessary. The parking is, I think, a real issue. And even though no additional parking space is required in your words, maybe it would be better to say an additional parking space is preferred but not required. Because I think parking is going to be an issue in a lot of these places, and maybe it's not required, but I think it needs to be addressed in one way or another. And what I worry about the most, I recognize that Old Town is where a lot of this might happen. But when we look at the rest of the community where we have kind of standard single-family homes, and people, let's say they decide they want to make apartments and do internal changes and stuff, I think we need to recognize that these buildings were never designed like that. And if we tried to put an upstairs apartment in a standard, 3 or 4 bedroom house, there's a lot of things that I don't think people recognize in terms of firewalls and safety and whatnot. And even though, we're going to inspect it and it's going to follow the building code, how much of that really happens? I know when I was in college, I lived in a 3-bedroom house that was broken up into funny apartments, and there was a lot of issues. I'll probably date myself, but if you've ever seen the movie called Pacific Heights, it was about a house in San Francisco that they divided into ADUs, and one of the tenants was a real bad guy, and well, it was a real horror movie. So Michael Keaton was the bad guy. Anyway, if you ever see that movie, it was horrible what happened and what potentially could happen if you have a standard house and you divide it in apartments, and one of your renters is not a good guy. So I do think that we need to be very careful about ADUs. I really do appreciate what you've done, and for Old Town, it makes a lot of sense. But in the rest of Tinmouth, kind of the standard single-family houses, if that became a big thing, that could be a real problem. I think that there's a lot of disadvantages to ADUs. If you've ever lived in, Fort Collins over near the university and lived in one of those houses where you had a weird basement apartment or something, there are some real issues about that. Somebody flushes the toilet and the shower goes cold. That really does happen because there isn't adequate water. It was never designed for, additional power outlets and stuff. And if you look at some of the new houses, for example, in trail sides, they have much smaller electrical boxes. They have much more limited electrical outlets just because they're doing things to make them cheaper, better, faster. But you could never make those into an apartment because they just aren't set up for that. So I really worry that this could be, 10 years from now, a big deal.
And may I think you bring up a good point. Trailside, those lots certainly probably can't accommodate an ADU. They're pretty maxed out on their coverage and other development standards. So one probably wouldn't even be allowed.
But an internal, upstairs apartment and a downstairs apartment in the basement, theoretically, you could do that all internal. You wouldn't have to tell hardly anybody, and all of a sudden you got one.
Yeah. And I think this, certainly once you start allowing them and you're more permissive with them, I don't know if this is true, but in my mind, the illegal conversion would tick down and more people would be opting to be above board with their conversions of ADUs. So that would trigger kind of these building code compliance issues.
Right. It would
When
fall
you
back on the
don't,
inspection.
when you don't allow them, that's when you have a lot of illegal ADUs.
I think the wording you proposed is reasonable, given what we have. But, you know, there's also a interesting news article that was out today on Colorado Public Radio. How many towns are fighting the state saying, no, we're not going to allow some of these state rules? The town of Westminster, the town of Colorado Springs, the city of Arvada, North Glen. They've all come out saying, we are not going to follow the state rules associated with ADUs. So I think that, and I sent a copy of that article over to Chad earlier. It is something to take into account that multiple cities in Colorado are kind of pushing back at the state requirements in this area.
Tom, I think in fairness, your points are well taken. I certainly don't disagree with anything. But until such time as the state makes a change, given what I presume is the limited opportunity to push back, as you put it, it's a state law, so we're obliged to
Yes,
to
I
fall into
agree.
line here,
As long
if
as
you
we
will.
we don't go out of our way to encourage something that may not be good for the town of Timnath.
Carolyn.
Yeah, so the state has found that this is a matter of state and local concern mix when they adopted this, which means that where there's a conflict, the state law applies, but the cities can go and have their own regulations, in addition to the state regulations. So for instance, Wendy asked the question about, well, the state only required ADUs between 500 and 750 square feet. Well, this allows for more. That's where the town's discretion comes in, is when the town can have different alternatives. I want to point out that you already allow ADUs. So look at what the modifications are. They're not adding this except for the one district where it was changed, but it is, it's the details that are being modified in here. And the process right now is there is a requirement to apply for an ADU permit. And what's proposed is that it would be administratively approved, which is actually the current practice as well. So that piece isn't going to change. So in terms of an illegal, someone just adding an ADU, that would not be in compliance with code. The code does require you to go through an ADU permit and to get that administrative approval.
Thank you.
I do want to touch on the notification for Old Town. So since we're proposing to allow maybe multiple and allow it on other lots than single family detached, perhaps notifying neighbors is appropriate in Old Town. So maybe that's worth discussion.
I think it would be appropriate anywhere in town, not just in Old Town, but even in Timnath Ranch or Summerfields.
Well, so it has to be, yeah.
If I was going to divide up my house into 3 apartments, I think notifying the neighbors would be the least of my worries.
I guess what would be,
So there's no public hearing requirement. So this is not something that's going to go before planning commission or council, where notifying the homeowners and the neighbors would give them an opportunity to appear and present their concerns. This is an administrative approval process. And one of the requirements of the state statute is that there has to be an objective approval process. So there's not really, if the criteria are met, it's going to be approved. So notifying the neighboring property owners may not necessarily create an opportunity for them to then stop construction of something that they don't want that would otherwise meet the criteria.
Would the administrative approval be impacted by all the neighbors complaining about it?
Well, let's look at the criteria.
Well, I mean, there's so many constraints on being able to disallow them that I can't imagine neighbor input would have a factor in this.
You were asking rhetorically, I
Yeah, I
presume.
mean, that's
You
kind of
knew the
scary,
answer
isn't
to
it?
that.
I don't know.
Well, that I guess was my question, is what would be the purpose of the notification? I mean, it seems if you're notifying, but they really don't have a say, it's a little disingenuous. So in terms of Old Town, if we were to notify, perhaps like if enough neighbors were opposed, it could be escalated to you all for your review for those certain circumstances. But I think for the regular administrative process, I don't think we can do, I don't know why we would do a neighbor notification.
I know
As
that
an
when
FYI or,
some people have had short-term rentals in Tinmouth, and the only reason it ever became discovered is because the neighbors complained. So I think that you're gonna end up with the town approves an ADU, somebody builds apartments into his house, and then the neighbors find out about it afterwards. They're gonna come to town hall and complain, don't you think?
so it's like a courtesy letter, like we're notifying you
I
that
don't know. It
this.
is a sticky situation, and I recognize you don't want to ask for somebody to complain. But if you don't tell them in front, there, you may get a worse reaction. I don't know. I mean, if you were the mayor, how would you want to do it?
You're asking
Yeah,
a
I'm
question
sorry.
that has a conundrum, but
It-
not really,
it does.
because the reality is there is no recourse. It is disingenuous, I think, to ask, because then I guess I want to play devil's advocate. Because there is no recourse.
That's
So
right.
you're asking and they say, may we have that disallowed because we don't want it? The answer is no. So
Well, I think the other thing you could use that letter for is to say this is happening and we don't have control by state statute. And try and put the fire out before it starts
Yeah.
and address it. Cause you're right, everyone, not in my backyard, but we don't have a choice.
Yeah.
And remember, it's only required to be administratively approved for one ADU associated with a single family detached dwelling. So that's where, I think Logan was suggesting if there were a different process for a second ADU or a different process for multifamily or duplex, that is possible to still be consistent with the state law. If those had to go to planning commissioner.
I think at the end of the day, having the words that you proposed are better than not having. So I would vote in favor of it. On the other side, I really worry over the long term that we're opening up a significant can of worms that we need to be very careful about.
we have to write our state representatives to address that
So-
can of worms.
Or make sure you tell the mayor it's going to happen before he fires you.
In my former position, Bloomington did very similar things. In fact, much more than what Timnath is doing. In fact, we went so far, the council was very supportive of that. Bloomington is a university town, similar to Fort Collins, with potential for illegal rental units. They had a different structure to regulate rental units, but bottom line, we went so far as to pre-design designs that anybody from the community could use to implement them. Very few people did because there are very expensive to build. And so I think the message that I have is the regulations are there to help make sure that people follow the rules. But I think the reality is I don't expect we're going to have a groundswell of applications coming in with these type of things. They tend to speak to very unique circumstances and interest, oftentimes for family members, very rarely for just purely renting out for anybody and everybody because they are so expensive to implement. And, I think the ones that we point to are good examples that are out there. And I think that's the intent, is trying to make sure that if they come into Timnath, they fit in Timnath appropriately and are done correctly. So we can continue to look at that and certainly appreciate the concerns about notifying neighbors, which again, we did in Bloomington. And the frustration with that is there was no recourse. We went through a conditional use approval process in the beginning that of the few that went through, really, there weren't any issues. And long story short, I don't think that notification will resolve anything as we have structured right now. Just wanted to provide you some of my prior experience with ADUs in Bloomington, but yeah.
Appreciate that.
Okay, I have some questions too, but go ahead.
So one quick thing, Tom brought up the parking, and I guess I assumed in striking that piece out, you're basically working in the constraints that the state gave you, right? Because if I remember correctly, the state law says specifically that you cannot have like a second driveway and things like that. So whatever, it went to kind of showing that that was a subordinate structure, that you can't have a second driveway, and, so whatever parking is with the main structure, that's all you get. And so I'm assuming that's why that was struck. It wasn't it wasn't your decision. It was to comply with the state law.
Correct.
Marty, that's also consistent with what Fort Collins recently passed too.
And just to clarify, I don't think you're prohibited from adding additional parking. It's just the town is prohibited from mandating
Right,
additional parking.
correct.
Can encourage it.
Okay. One question, I got several others. Tom, you mentioned a minute ago you were happy with the language. Are you talking about the language as is now, or are you asking to have a condition put on
No,
this?
I think that the language that's been proposed by staff is better than not having any language associated with ADUs.
The language that is being proposed as part of this amendment?
Yes.
Or you want, because with the discussion about noticing, not noticing, whatever, I'm just confused.
Yeah, I think that the proposed language, the amended language that they've asked for gives us at least some basis for ADUs. It may not be perfect, but I think we need to recognize that, it's better to have something rather than nothing, and maybe in the future we'll have to amend it.
As a wise person said, what is that expression? Don't let perfect get in the way of better. Better? Thank you.
Exactly.
Thank you. I wish I'd come up with that.
On that note, are we done with the question?
No, I have
Okay,
several.
Go ahead.
Did you have any, I'm just curious with all the good work too, on ADUs, did you submit anything that's incorporated in there?
I did send a few comments, but I think that they were addressed in the preamble that she showed in her slides.
Okay. Okay, Wendy, back to you. Are you anything? Okay, I have a couple questions here. Just as I also put on my HOA president hat here, is it safe to say, Carolyn commented on this, staff commented on it, that an ADU, a freestanding ADU, let alone an add-on, has to reasonably, if not wholly, comply with the architectural standards and colors, to Wendy's comment, of the principal property?
No.
If the requirements are in the covenants, yes, that would be correct. An HOA is prohibited from requiring restrictions that would be in contrast with the state law requirements. So just like the town can't mandate additional parking, and HOA couldn't mandate additional parking. But in terms of just design elements, they can require that the same design element requirements for the main primary home be also met for that.
The
ADU.
HOA may require that, is that correct? Okay, good. And for a duplex or a paired home, as one of our developer representatives like to call them, do I understand that an ADU would be allowed, but it must be, obviously must be behind the paired home of the owner? So I know it's that stupid question, but in other words, a paired home and it's 50-50, the ADU must be within the confine, assuming it meets the setback standards, it must be within the confines in the backyard.
Yeah, it would be in the building envelope, yeah, meeting the setbacks. So a paired home and a duplex are different though. A paired,
Right, I
Okay.
remember that,
so
yes.
a duplex is 2 units on one lot. A paired home is each unit, they have a shared wall, are on their own individual simple fee lots.
But there's no requirement that has to be in the backyard as long as the setbacks are met. For instance, over the garage is a common place to put an ADU, which could be adjacent to the home.
Okay, I realize that on either a duplex or a paired home, the likelihood that there's sufficient room for one of these is minimal anyway. Toward that end, you mentioned when we were talking about how little chance there is that we're going to have a plethora of ADUs anyway, but you mentioned that the restriction on number of lots that are eligible. Roughly how many lots in Timnath would be eligible for ADUs?
I wouldn't be able to do that for you. We would have to look at how many lots haven't maxed out their coverage, their building coverage, how many have sufficient backyard space to accommodate an ADU with access. So Lindsay made a map. You had a question about how many lots are more than 10,000.
Yes, that was going to be my second one, and I knew you'd be
Okay.
on top of that.
Yes. How do I do this? Okay.
Just a rough idea of what, just to get an idea how many homes we're talking about that we would allow a bigger ADU because the lot is bigger.
Yeah, so about a quarter of the lots in Timnath are more than 10,000, and those are highlighted in green. And I can't see the number because it's not, is it like 1,300, Lindsay, or? Okay, 1,351 out of, yeah.
Okay, that's great. I appreciate that. I was curious about that. I think that's it. Now, I want to circle back really to Marty here and others who chime in on the issue of more liberal allowance for a number of ADUs in Old Town. I guess you brought this up, Marty, others sort of chimed in. The question is, having heard staff indicate that it would be feasible to survey or however they come at this, do you want to add a condition? Would you see adding a condition to this?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, I think there's enough things to work out, getting input, to be fair, to the residents of Old Town, plus working out the noticing, there need to be noticing and all those sorts of things. I would propose a condition to take out the language in, that references, there's 2 spots, I think, in here, 4.4.1.6A. Taking out the sentences that reference R1 and V zones specifically. And, like we talked about, I don't want to delay the whole thing. I would propose a condition to take those out, move this forward without those, look into those, and then come back to them once.
So certainly. So that's one approach. This also will be delayed, like it won't go to council right away. So that will give us some time to survey Old Town residents. So you could also condition it that way.
But there's a lot to do and, surveying them, maybe even having a meeting now that they know, they should have known this was going on, but now, maybe specifically making them aware of this, but also working out the details on what the noticing would be and things like that. This is needed sooner than later because I do know people that you want to move forward with this, but they can't right now because of the current restrictions.
Okay.
I would support this. The way I look at it, if my neighborhood was being singled out and that's not exactly the right way to put this, but for either more liberal or more restrictive, it would seem prudent, particularly because of council's emphasis on transparency, it would seem prudent to survey the people and make sure we have a valid survey, I might add, before moving forward on this one. So I certainly would support that, a condition on that clause, if you will.
Exactly which part of the clause? Sorry, I want to make sure I understand. The
Uh,
variance from the state?
It's
No.
416A and C is what he's.
Yeah, the language in A, you know, that last sentence that says in R1 and B, it would be different. And then
Got it.
same thing in C, removing the except in, everything after except in.
So would you help me with this? Would you see, would you phrase the condition of approval of this overall amendment, the condition specifically to that item dealing with Old Town, to specify that there should be a valid survey done and come back to Planning Commission? How would you?
No, I would approve it, move it forward to council with the language in here, you know, with the exceptions for B and R1 removed. And then after those things, they would come back as an amendment.
We would come
to
back to
this.
an amendment to the land
Yeah.
use code
Yeah,
amendment
like I
again.
said, I don't want to delay moving this
Okay.
forward, so.
Well, I think that's a good way of looking to remove it entirely. Other commissioners, you understand what?
So remove the survey and this?
Not the, no,
That's nothing to do with survey.
remove the provision for multiple ADUs in Old Town
Okay.
entirely until, and then it can come
relook
back
at it.
through an amendment to the amendment, which I imagine by the time we get through all 35 amendments, we'll be amending them anyway.
Yeah, I think this is a good start, though. I think staff did a reasonable job with a very difficult situation.
Okay.
Mhm.
Other comments, questions? Renzo, did you have something else?
No,
Looked
I-
like. Anybody?
Discussion.
Okay, so we are, do we need to amend the amendment to strike this provision of multiple units in Old Town?
No, if someone would just like to make a motion, it's a motion to approve this proposed change to, on ADUs, except for striking the language specific to the R1 and B zone districts.
I think that's within my skill range.
Okay,
Okay, motion to approve, we're ready for the motion?
Yes.
Okay, motion to approve item 7B, accessory dwelling units with the language accepting R1 and B zones from the land use, the code amendment.
Carolyn, acceptable? Okay, do I have a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, carries on a 5-0 vote. Thank you. Good job. Good job. Tom, Wendy, both of you, great work on this. Is
Sorry
exceeded
if
my
I
expectations.
editorialized a little bit more than I should have.
It's good.
Well, that's, yes, but we'd rather have more than less.
Okay.
Okay, very good. Excuse me, we move on to reports real quickly. On the 18th, I want to make sure who is not here on the 18th. I want to see if we. Of March, yeah. Tom's not here. Marty's not here. Renzo, you're here. Michael, Wendy, me. Okay, we have a quorum on the 18th. So okay. And I mentioned each of you as you came in looking for a work session. Michael, you're going to let me know tomorrow if you can make March, when we were looking at it, March 4th. Staff, that's that's looking better, especially if Michael can make it, because Tom can't make April 1st.
Right, I'm out April 1st as well as the 18th.
I'm not certain about holding a work session on April Fool's Day either. We will have business items on both meetings in March, correct, as far as we know?
I'm not certain yet. But sure, as far as we know.
Okay, if we have a business, if we do this work session on either date, even though leaning towards March 4th, especially if Michael says he can make it, we would start at 4:30. If my staff, if we don't have any business items on, we could start later then if
Yeah, so if we know in time, we can let you know. And then if we just want to have the work session at 6 at the regular time, we can notice it that way.
Okay, I'll first hear from Michael. I'll circle back to you right after that. And then we'll decide. But if we do have a business item, we would start at 4:30 and then run right up to our business session at 6 o'clock. Okay. I think that's it. Commissioners, anything else Very good. All right. Well, thank you again. Everybody contributed well to this. Staff, appreciate it. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you.